Welcome to Tangent Animation Blender Unit 1.4 User Interface and Windows. So now that we've seen some of how Blender works on the inside, how does it work cosmetically? So we have lots of menus and windows to have a look at here, some of which are pretty self-evident as to how they work. So up here in the upper left corner, we have a standard file menu. So for creating a new file, opening a pre-existing file, open recent, etc. Also, for recovering work on crashes, recover last session. There's also recover autosave. Blender autosaves approximately every 5 minutes. That's come in handy more than once. And there is save, Control S, save as, save a copy, user interface. Two items whose naming terminology is unique to Blender are link and append. Coming from a Maya universe, link is reference and append is import. So the specific applications of those in production we will go over in those units. Import and export are for bringing in different file flavors like OBJs or FBX, etc., etc. And of course, quit when you get tired. So there are two menus that can be called up with every 3D window. One which is the T menu, and the other is the N menu. The 3D viewport here is a window, and these are regions. Regions are attached to a pre-existing window. So if I go into an animation view and click here and hit N and T, those region menus only appear for that window. I can also make them appear for this window here. I'm going to flip this back to the default view and carry on. The T menu on the left is your toolbar. To activate any window, you just click above it. If you click in the window, that's going to move your 3D cursor. That is sometimes not desired. You can hit Shift-C to replace it to the origin. The T menu is the tool menu. So here you have translate, rotate, scale, mirror. These all have hotkeys that have gone over on other units. So what you're also going to see is that there are other menus as well. There's the creation menu, the relations menu, physics, grease pencil for drawing in 3D, which will be a separate unit, other tools that we'll get to later, layer management, and navigation. Now, also from the tangent animation perspective, there will be a lot of proprietary tools to go over in this menu. Those will be gone over in separate units. In all likelihood, you will not actually spend a great deal of time using the default Blender tools in the toolbar because there's smarter ways to access those, mostly through hotkeys. The N menu, which is the information window for whatever object you happen to have selected. So I'm switching from the cube to the camera to the light. Go back to the cube. So at first, it's the channel box, which is not unlike the way that it's dimensioned in Maya. Now also the ability to invoke the grease pencil tool is over here as well. That will be a separate unit. And there are some display options for turning on things like ambient occlusion and depth of field. You, of course, may open and close these tabs. And also, if you left-click on those little dotted lines, you can also change the order in which they're displayed in the N menu as well. So we can pull that up and drop that up here. So a couple of important items to get to in the N menu. You'll notice now that I'm actually looking through a camera with a gate, and if I start to tumble as we learned before, the camera gate seems to have disappeared. So in order to see my items, I'm going to turn off the only render tab to see non-renderable objects. So there's my camera. So what I would like to do is look through that camera at the cube. So I'm going to hit 0 on the numeric keypad. I am now looking through that camera. If I use the middle mouse wheel to zoom in and out, that's not actually moving the camera, that's just changing the gate relative to the window size. If I want to start navigating with this camera, I go up into the View tab and turn on Lock Camera to View. Now, if I start to tumble or dolly, that is now the actual production camera in the scene. This same camera here that we see in the outliner. So you'll notice as I navigate that the statistics are changing for the camera that I have selected in the channel box. And once again, if I only want to see the objects that will actually render in my shot, I can put on the Only Render tab. The 3D cursor, the lamp, and the grid all disappear. And a quick stroke of the N key makes the information window disappear. So I want to get back into that view. I'm going to hit N again, And I'm going to turn off lock to camera view so I can start working with the default perspective camera that is not actually an object of the outliner, just the default viewer. And the lens length in the information window is for the default view camera. So that is the focal length for that camera, not for the production camera. The production camera up here is accessed elsewhere. If we want to look through that camera, we hit the 0 key, and to navigate with that camera, lock to view. Now, it is worth noting there's a lot of information in these various windows, and if you don't want to ruin your good looks by putting on your reading glasses, what you can do is expand the window a little bit, and with the numeric keypad, plus and minus keys, you can zoom up and down the font size of the N menu, the T menu, and the Properties menu. The outliner, however, will function differently. Hitting the plus key over here will actually expand your node structure. If I hit the minus key, I can recontract that to its former display. And speaking of the outliner, another important default window that comes up is the outliner. And this is your object list in Blender. So a default scene comes with 3 items: camera, cube, and lamp. And as we went over in the selection module, you quite simply click on them to select them, and the end menu updates. To show that is the item that you are referencing. Now, also in the outliner, there's a couple more icons here. So we're looking at our cube right now. What it can do is this little eyeball icon. If I turn that off, that turns off the display in the 3D viewport. Now, if we did an actual render of this, it would still render. But if we don't want it to be renderable, we would turn off the camera icon. I'll turn the camera and the eyeball back on. What I can also do is deselect this cursor icon here, and now the object, I can navigate around it, but I've made it unselectable if I want to make a commitment to where that is and not mess with it for a little while. So I'm going to go back down here and turn off only render, so once again I can see my 3D environment and its contents. And once again, if I want to get to any one of these items, I can just quite simply hit the decimal key. The next window down that comes with the default Blender setup is the Properties menu. And you can see there's a lot of different tabs in here. The ones that we're going to be principally concerned with getting started are this camera icon here, which is basically dictating both our render and our playblast stats. We'll go over those in more detail when we actually use them. This little chain link here is for creating constraints between objects, which will also have its own unit. Properties of the object at the object level, and a geometric object's shading information. There are, of course, more tabs in there, but that's what we'll deal with for the moment. Down here is our timeline, which is, of course, an animation tool for previewing things passing over time. So we'll just throw a little bit of simple animation onto our cube here, activate the window, hit the I key, make a location key, go to a different frame, key again. Now I can scrub. I can also hit the play button. The hotkey for play is Alt-A. One way the Blender timeline differs from the Maya timeline is you do see your keyframes in the timeline, but you cannot edit them, cut, copy, paste, move, or delete. It is solely for display. There is also currently no middle mouse button functionality, meaning that you could move the cursor without it changing the actual time. There are workarounds for that functionality inside Blender, but that will be when we spend more time in the graph editor and the dope sheet. Generally speaking, when you're working in production animation, you want inside your playback settings audio scrubbing and AV sync for proper synchronization and playback of your soundtrack. Unlike Maya, your soundtrack is not available to you visibly in the timeline. It is available in another editor called the Video Sequence Editor that we will go over later. Another noteworthy button is right here, and that is Auto Key. I'm going to go to a new frame. I'm going to move my cube again. Because Auto Key is on, it is automatically writing a keyframe to it. Now, Auto Key works a little bit differently than it does in Maya by default. If I go Shift A, I'm going to create a new object, a sphere, and I'm going to move that. Even though it had no keyframes on it initially, AutoKey wrote one to it once I moved it. Maya AutoKey does not work like that. Maya AutoKey does not write to an object that was not previously keyed. The Blender one does. You may turn that off in the preferences, but that is the default. You turn on AutoKey, make a change, it will keyframe that change. Now, as far as the timeline is concerned, you can set the start and end duration of your animation shot. You can also, with these little circle icons on the end, dictate what the overall frame range you can see inside and outside of the duration of your actual shot. By holding down the middle mouse key, you can also slide around your frame range. With the scroll wheel, you can contract and expand. And you can use the Shift-B tool to zoom in on a specific area as well. Okay, some other important menu items, I'm just going to get rid of the end menu to create a little more screen real estate, is the key set menu. Right now that is blank, but what I can do is I can set it to set keys to particular animation channels. A standard default is locate, rotate, scale. So now when I select an object and hit I, it no longer makes a request as to what channels I want to key. Or if you're working with a character, it can be set to whole character and key all the controllers on that character at one time. Now I'm going to restrict my timeline here by hitting this little lock icon down here, which basically means that I cannot move current time outside of the set frame range. If I turn that lock back off, I could potentially go into negative frames or beyond the range of the actual shot, which is sometimes necessary to put a couple of extra keys in for motion blur. Over here is the menu for the different modes in the 3D viewport. Since we have geometry selected, we see object, edit, sculpt, vertex, weight, and texture. And if we had a character present, we can also flip into pose mode to select armatures. It is also noteworthy that the Z key takes you through different display modes, wireframe, and shaded. And if we flip over to looking at some toast, the most common display modes that you use in OpenGL are solid, that we're looking at right now, or material, which can show you your textures. In addition to that, you can also turn on, in the individual window in the end menu, ambient occlusion to help show contact, and depth of field that you have figures for plugged in to your production camera. We'll go over the specifics of the operation of those optical camera functions in a later unit. The item next to that is how you control the pivots of your objects. There's any number of pivot settings for manipulating the movement, rotation, and scaling of objects. We will go over those in other modules. The default is individual origins, which is based on the centroid of the object. And then, of course, we have our modes from before that we discussed: global, local, normal, gimbal, view. These little squares here are the layering system. That will also have its own unit. And these icons here, the camera is to take a snapshot of your window, and the clapper is to do an animation play blast. And that is your basic overview of Windows and user interface items in Blender. Don't worry, there's lots more menus and lots more detail to come in future modules. See you there soon.